if you want to change where you are going, you need to kind of look back at where you have been.
Calendar year is coming to a close, Patrick.
It is. It is. And that's, as you've said before, I believe it was you, that, hey, this whole like end of this is somebody arbitrarily decided this, and you can arbitrarily decide to make your new year, your end of year different.
Which is why I say calendar year. Like I don't say year,
exactly.
because I don't follow it, right? Like, and what's interesting, and this is actually an interesting thing in terms of the topic today of reflection and growth. I've been reflecting on, will September still be the start of my year once the kids are completely gone? Because that was the reason in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
They were going to be home for the summer and so on and so forth. Well, summer has changed for my daughter now. When she comes home, it'll be May, right? Because and then, but she'll be taking off in July because she wants to get back to Montreal and find a place to live. And she doesn't want to be, spending money on, rent when she's not there. So she'll probably stick around for a couple months and then have some time to settle into Montreal. But what does that mean next summer? Like the summer after this, the 2025 summer? Well, it means she probably won't come home. So we'll be going to her, right? So then our summer changes. And with my son being in high school, yes, his summer is still July and August. So in 3 years, I could see me just reverting to the good old fashioned birthday. July 3rd is the start of my year and July 2nd marks the end of it. And, I think that is probably where I'll head after, much reflection, because the summer it's not arbitrary, but it doesn't have as much of it doesn't have much certainty surrounding it, which dovetails off our last one, right?
Right. Exactly. Right. And I, it's kind of funny, this topic, because one of the things that has become really apparent to me lately with my daughter, who is 16 and a half, right? Is just how accelerated the maturity has become. How it seems like, how these things go. They're kind of a steady uphill and then a jump, and a steady uphill and then a jump of and so there are just with growth and development in general. And so this has been recently one of those times where we've noticed a jump, where it seems like she went to bed as one person and woke up as a completely different person. and quite frankly, subjectively, a better one, right?
Yeah.
And with the ability to reflect on how she used to be, and how her thinking on this thing has become different, and that she's worked on that, and that she has reached that goal.
Right.
Which is an incredibly mature thing to do. And I think many adults either don't do that or don't make the time to do that, which is the whole point behind, treating any sort of end of year as a milestone, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea is about looking back at the year that's passed and kind of looking at your successes and failures there, looking at what you've learned, maybe setting some goals for the next year around that, and then working towards those goals with those in mind. And some folks don't do that. Other folks do it and just much for, my resolution is to lose weight, sort of, just off the top of your head sort of thing. One thing that my wife and I did, and I highly, highly recommend it, at the end of last year, was, and we're trying to figure out how to do it for this year, was we had a kind of a couples retreat where we went up to Duluth, which is Duluth, Minnesota is on the bank of Lake Superior in northern Minnesota. It's a beautiful and important Minnesota community, and we just find it lovely up there, and it's close enough to the Twin Cities that one can do a day trip. We've done day trips before where we've driven up in the morning, spent all day there, driven back at night, gotten home by 10:30, 11 o'clock, and been to bed, and it's just been a lovely day spent. But I think what we discovered when we did this last year was that it really does require like a couple of days to really settle into and do. And to have those conversations over dinner, over a lunch, over a coffee in the afternoon or something like that. But we did this thing. I know folks can't listen to podcasts, can't see this, but you can.
Yeah.
We did this thing called a year compass.
Mm-hmm.
This our year compass for 2023 and 2024. And it's basically a little workbook, maybe about 20 sheets, looking at the numbers, where you kind of write down, like, okay, what were the highlights for the last year? Going through your calendar, take a look, and you go through your calendar starting in January, and you write down the highlights, and you come up with this. I can't decide which way to go with the camera, with the list, right?
Yep.
Right. And then this is what my last year was about. And you kind of group those items into kind of themes and such. And then, and so it forces you to do the work.
Yeah.
To look at the last year, reflect on it, look at what, kind of where your energy was directed and was driven, and use that to help to spawn the goals and things you want to accomplish for next year. Right.
It's funny, really quickly. You mentioned doing the work, right? So I was talking to somebody the other day about journaling, right? Because I think that's a really important tool for reflective practice, right? And obviously you're doing, and if you're listening to this in that December, January kind of, for lack of a better term, lull, right? Where you're like either in the holidays or maybe you're just coming out of it. This is the time where cultivating that kind of journaling habit can happen. But we were talking actually about Apple and how they've added that journaling app to their phone. It was an Apple user, and I'm an Apple user as well. And what I find, first off, when Apple does something like that, and you've been around the space long enough to recognize this as well, it means that they see a place for it. They see, oh my goodness, day one's doing this. There's a journaling is becoming more popular. We're going to infuse it into our own ecosystem. But what I find disturbing is not the right word, but the journaling app that Apple has doesn't require the work that I believe journaling can benefit from. So let me give you an example. So to me, it's more like a daily log. Remember when Brett Terpstra had the daily log thing that he wrote the code or whatever, and it would just
I do a daily log, right?
Yep.
I do it by pen and paper, but yes.
But so there is merit to that. There's things you can learn from that. But the story, the narrative, the deeper part, you're not really going to get from the automation aspects of what, say, Apple's journaling app does. Or, you're just pulling in from different sources saying, oh, here's what the weather was. Here's the photos I took. And here is, some of the things that I did. It's when you actually sit down and say, okay, I went to the doctor's, but here's how I felt about that. Or first day at school, here are my feelings around that. The idea of, and I'm not saying that I think it's a nice gateway to journaling, but I don't know. It's even a gateway to reflection, but it is almost like the McDonald's of reflection, right? Like you're not going to get a lot of meat. Like it's not going to fill you up with nutrients nearly as much as it's going to give you, you're going to be full, but is it the right kind of full, I guess? What do you think? Because no one's sitting down, reflection has elements of what you're talking about in the Year Compass, and there's the Life Atlas, which is done by the Monk Manual folks, and all of that, and you could see, there's definite merits to that. Plenty of journaling, plenty of day planners implement this kind of thing. But when you start, and maybe that's all Apple's journal app is supposed to be, is a gateway. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's just to get more people to do it. But I find that there is a really key missing component that not only they're missing out on, but the journaler misses out on by simply using that app and not adding anything to it, and just using it as more of a daily log, a compilation of things that happened, but without any narrative or story behind it that you have sat down and taken time to kind of share. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so, I guess, I guess my mild pushback to that would be that there is a place and an importance for both. Someone literally just emailed me about this very thing. Wondering about what if I did any sort of basically how I journaled, what I journaled, how day one fit into that versus, say, my daily log versus, say, the more kind of thought, story, reflection, journaling that I might do versus and about okay, so and those things that you keep digitally, how do you go about putting them onto paper, right? And more importantly, why do this? Why keep this?
Yeah.
Right. And so I tend to think of this stuff not in personal terms all the time, although certainly that's important. But it is nice to occasionally randomly pull one of my daily logs off the shelf, usually as I'm going to switch out, usually around the end of the year when I'm going to change out my 2024 to 2025.
Right.
I'll be like, let me just pull 2010 off the shelf and just flip through it. Yeah.
Giggles,
right?
Yeah. I've spent time doing that too. It's amazing how many years I've been even just in reflection. I looked yesterday when I was doing the episode for Dave Radpravar, the live stream we did for him, and he's the founder of Reflection. He's behind it. And I looked at when I made that video, I think it was 3-4 years ago. I'm like, oh wow, I've been using this app for 4 years. And before that, I used day one. So I mean, there's a rich history there.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about day one is that you can actually print a book
Right.
Out of your day one. It's a service that they provide, just built right in, and which is fantastic. But I digress. The whole point, and the point of, and I do that. Like, I basically have a checklist at the beginning of every year, and one of the items on that checklist is order day one journal for print, because all of my day one journals are by year.
Right.
And so I can very easily say print 2024, the journal I have called 2024. And 2 weeks later, this beautiful bound book with the photos and everything shows up on my doorstep. Is fantastic. But why do that? That's really the crux of the question. And my standard answer to that is that I have benefited greatly knowing a lot about my ancestry, about my family's history, about what they did, what their days might be like, that sort of thing, by the fact that I have ancestors that did that stuff, that they were literate people going all the way back for generations. And those literate college educated people did literate college educated things like write things down, write about things, write each other things, write letters and write postcards and write down their finances, keep a financial record. They wrote all these things on paper. And the lovely thing about paper is that, unlike digital, paper will last for thousands of years. Yes, I know. Sure. Go ahead. Fool yourself into believing that this Word document, this PDF, this text file, you will be able to open up in 3,000 years. That won't happen. Here's what I can tell you will happen. If it's printed and it is properly stored, that paper will be there.
Right.
And anyone with two hands and eyeballs can pick it up and read it. Even if they don't speak that language anymore, they can decipher it. Heck, we've just deciphered scrolls from Pompeii, for God's sakes. Pom freaking Pei, that were burnt to nearly a crisp underneath ash of a volcano. And we have deciphered those MFers. So don't for a second tell me that, paper. No. Paper will last all sorts of stuff. Your writing will last. And if you care about it and you want it to be read for generations, you will do it on paper. If you want to journal and you care about the reason why you journal is not just for your own personal reflection, but so that your grandchildren, great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren will be able to know something about who you were and what you did. Why? Well, because it's interesting and it matters. And because, isn't it interesting that I, a writer, am related to Ralph Ellison?
Wow.
Right?
Yeah.
And how do I know this? Well, because he wrote letters to our shared great grandmother on a regular basis, right? And so he was my cousin, right?
Wow.
And isn't it kind of funny how this writing gene keeps popping up here and there and everywhere, right? And so all of that is to say that yes, this stuff is great for personal reflection. Doing it by hand on paper or even on computer and printing it out is the best long-term storage medium, the best backup medium we have available to us.
Yep.
The only one that's proven for thousands of years. And those of you who used to do this in Claire's works can tell me if you can still open up that document or not. Right. So yeah, you got to print it. In any case, all of this is to say that if you want to change where you are going, you need to kind of look back at where you have been.
Reflection and growth go hand in hand.
They really do. And you may look back and decide there's things you don't want to change. Maybe that thing you thought you might want to change, you look back and you go, oh, this thing about me, or this thing that's kind of saved my butt on a few occasions. It's not so bad as I thought. And maybe I just need to kind of redirect the way I deploy it. But yeah, maybe this is not a bad thing, or maybe there's something I could learn here.
It is interesting. It is interesting the way we share this stuff. People journal whether they believe it or not, right? Like, I think it's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, social media is a good example of this, right? It's not the best example of how to keep a journal, but you are keeping a journal if you're using social media in most cases, especially if you're using it. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example, and this wasn't said publicly. I'm not going to share who said it, but a friend of mine celebrated a milestone birthday. And one of the things, and this person, kind of reflected on the fact that, the rat race really doesn't matter. Like, they got, like, what matters is health and family and relationships and stuff. And I'm like, well, I actually did a voice response to them because it was sent over Messenger. And I'm like, well, look, I mean, some people never figure that out. Like, the fact that you sat and thought about this while, having a drink on your birthday and just had that eureka moment about it. What you do with that, I think, is important. I didn't say that part to him, but what you do with that is important. But also, some people never get there. And I think, we get so caught up in action that reflection takes a back seat to the point where it's so far, like when you're sitting in like a minivan or an SUV, there's the seat right behind you. No, reflection is in the seat that's in the very back that you can't quite access unless you slow down and kind of, that's kind of how it feels to me.
You're reaching back there blind, searching for that.
Exactly. Oh, wait.
Know it when you feel it.
You moved into the very back. Why are you there? Well, we need to leave room for all this other stuff that, no. If anything, the car's empty. Sit next to me. Like, this is the time when nobody's here, sit next to me. And I mean, again, that time of year, and I also think that, and you brought this up, I wanted to circle back to Beatrix, because Colton's going through the same thing. Going to bed there's these milestones as they get older. Yeah, I went through this with Grace, still will, right? Like, I mean, we all grow, no matter how old we are. But it almost felt like when kids get to a certain age, the curiosity starts to blend with judgment, right? And sometimes it becomes and sometimes the judgment kind of overrides it, especially when you become a teenager and you're in middle school and high school and stuff like that, because judgment is such it's a really powerful thing. But then, I kind of wrote this thing where it's like, as we get older, judgment recedes and curiosity. I mean, in theory, you can get back to that level, right? Because at least I feel like I'm doing that. I'm maybe wrong. Maybe not everybody's doing that. I would imagine there's a lot of people not doing that. Maybe judgment wins out in the end. The old Ted Lasso quote of like, be curious, not judgmental, right? I think judgment, it's a very interesting time when you hit those teen years, because your curiosity kind of goes away. So, I mean, it takes the back seat. It's in the back seat compared to judgment, right? And when the problem with reflection for some people, I would imagine, is avoiding the judgment aspect of it. I mean, I know in my entries, I will call myself out and say stuff that may not.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. My worst critic is inside my journal.
Yeah.
That guy's an asshole and he hates me.
Yep. But other days he's like, you did good. Like, good job. Way to go. Like, right.
What's up with that guy? He can't make up his mind. Either I'm the devil or I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. Yeah. It's like,
it is interesting the way, and I've looked at my journal entries recently as we were preparing for this episode. And again, I used reflection for this, and it was like some entries are very deep. And they go, and I can tell I've dictated them because there's things that don't spell necessarily correctly, and I don't really care about that. It's more about getting at them. But then others are like, very, very short, almost Hemingway-esque sentences of like, and it is more of a daily log. And I'm actually finding myself more curious about those entries as opposed to the longer ones, where I think the shorter entries are like, what was I preoccupied with? Why did I, if I like yesterday's entry was like that. I was like, that. And I go, why is this entry so short? So I actually led myself to ask another question. Whereas, if I go back, say 4, 7, 8 years and can look at a short entry, one tells a story. Great example. Still have writer's block. Was one entry. I'm like, okay, there's a story there. That's that. There is a story.
Yeah.
And there's no.
Yeah. And maybe I can figure out just based on the time what it was I was working on and why I was struggling, right?
Yeah. And if you've kept the streak alive, it's much easier because the breadcrumbs are there, right? Like they're pebbles and not breadcrumbs. Whereas there are some that are just like, what was I, to your point, what was I going through? And then this is where I think and I don't go this deep, I think you could, is the supporting material of like, okay, when was this calendar? When was this done? Let me look at my calendar for that day and see like what was going on. So the calendar can provide clues in terms of your obligations. It won't tell the emotional components behind it, but so to me, it's, and I've told people this when they're doing any kind of reflective practice, meditations or exercise, they're all forms of it. But I mean, in terms of like keeping the streak alive, first off, whatever your streak is. Secondly, because it doesn't have to be just like the start of the year. It doesn't have to be like every day or every 5 days. Like it can be whatever you want it to be. But the looking back at those entries and saying, look, if you can keep a streak going, that's the thread. It's a procedural, like it's a thread. You are the character and you are seeing the story unfold. And some of those things will give really, really interesting answers, and some you'll have to look through the subtext.
Yeah. Well, and, so looping all the way back around to, your slight criticism of the Apple journaling app and, to a certain extent, extended from that day one, is, here's the thing. So I keep my day one journal. I keep a daily log, and kind of a regular thoughts and feelings, as I like to call it, journal, right? All three of those things, right? And it's like, well, wow, why do you keep all three separate things or whatever? Well, and it's like, well, the daily log really is, here's all the tasks I did. I don't care to put those in my journal. I want to keep those separate, here's, but I will say, here's some other interesting data that my daily log captures, or that I capture in my daily log, I should say. Number one, how I slept the night before.
Right.
And so I can go all the way back for, going on, I don't know, 12 years, 15 years here. I don't know. How I've slept every single night for that long.
Jeez.
When I had good sleep, when I had bad sleep, when I had a really strange dream. Oftentimes I'll actually write down what the strange dream was about. The other night it was about Bill Clinton and discussing the Middle East. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
But he didn't have any good solutions either.
All right, fair enough.
Bill didn't. And so but he had some interesting observations. But all of that is to say that, that stuff is kind of important, right? Because oftentimes in my thoughts and feelings, I don't talk about like the projects I might have finished that day or what I might have gotten done that day. I talk about like maybe how I felt about something, but but oftentimes that stuff is completely different from what I put in, because what's going on here, right, in my head is not necessarily the same as what is going on here with my hands, right? Yeah. And what I'm working on. But here's the other thing that I want to say.
Yeah.
This is about the Apple Journal. This is about day one. The reason why that stuff is important. The reason why, hey, that's where I keep my like, here's this photo of the meal I ate. Here's the that's the tweet sort of stuff, I suppose. That's but also I pipe into day one every post that is on Rhonisms, on my blog is also in day one. That is basically a paper backup of those posts.
Mm-hmm.
So if I post it to Rhonisms, it also is in day one. So when I print that out at the end of the year, I have a backup of all of my posts for the year. If I post something, very rarely I post to Instagram. If it's in Instagram, it's in day one.
Yep.
That also gets piped there, right?
Yep.
So, but the reason why these are great tools for reflection, and I plan to use this, use both when I am looking back and doing next year's year compass, which I'm sure Mike will link to in the show.
Oh, there's a plethora of links in this.
Yes. Okay. Is when I'm reflecting on the past years, that these photos, these little snippets you put in there, those little things that automatically piped in there, from the weather to the map location to the, like, all of those things are breadcrumbs. They're breadcrumbs for your memory. They're little breadcrumbs that you leave behind, right? And so that thing that you may not have written down in your journal, or that wasn't important enough to put in your daily log, but it was a picture of a plate of food that you had for breakfast on a particular day, and you open that up to that page. You just open it up randomly. You see that and you're like, holy crap, that was a really good breakfast. Why don't I eat there more often?
Yeah.
Why don't I make that more often? Huh? Or, oh, wow, I remember that was a really great night. I haven't seen that person I had that dinner with in a while. Maybe I should pick up the phone and call them. Right? They're little breadcrumbs for your memory to follow back, so that when you are reflecting, you can remember, because there's things that you're not going to write down in your journal, but there's things that Apple will help you remember in their journaling app.
Yeah, that's fair. That's valid.
All right.
I've been thinking about, as we've been talking about this, I was thinking about this beforehand too, is the idea of, and I say this in my work all the time. In fact, every episode ends with stop doing productive, start being productive. I wonder if the journal is the place where the being starts to happen, right? Or it can help you get to the being. So the calendar, the to-do list,
like it's
there's
both,
right?
There's the doing part.
Because
But the journaling,
there are
by
things in
adding
there that
that
I
piece,
aspire to
it
do,
gets you
but there's also
closer
things
to
in there
the-
that I have done.
the coalescence,
And then there's just
of
the
kind
doing
of thoughts
to make
that
sure that
live in
it's
between
getting you. And
to
I think that
the being part.
the being who you want
I'd love
to
to
be,
hear your thoughts on this.
and
but
it's almost like the journaling. I think it
can
could be a missing
cultivate
step.
that
Like, I mean,
being
I've looked
that
at my
we
journaling, and
ultimately
it's
at the
been
end of it all
both
are striving to
motivational
be. 'Cause at the end of it all,
and
no one's going to go, well,
how many things
aspirational.
did you do? What did you, it's going to be like, who were you? Right.
Yeah, but I do. Yes, and I do think that there is oftentimes a great disconnect between who we are and what we do.
Right. What I'm
Right.
saying is that the journal can narrow that gap, can serve to narrow that.
certainly-
Yeah.
Well, or at the very least serve to reveal it. Right?
Yes.
Serve to be a point of reflection on why if I say I want to be X, am I spending all my energy doing Y?
Yeah. It reveals patterns.
It can reveal patterns, and that's one of the things I like about the daily log. That's
Mhm.
one of the things I like about these journaling apps that might automatically get fed stuff into them. Is one of the things I love about actually doing this reflection, as my wife and I did last year, and that was just like a whole game changer for me. Because along with that, we also did. And this is another thing I know that you are a fan of. You call it something different, but it is your find your word.
Oh, yep. Mine's my annual
Conway.
Yep. Find your word.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Right. And then you have, you do your thing with the theme, and that sort of thing.
Yep.
One of the things that it revealed to me was I felt like last year was just like I had a lot of things unfinished. Like it just it felt like I just had so many things that were in progress and not enough that had been completed, right? And so my word of the year for this year has been finished. And I have written that word. So for my daily log, I keep a Hobonichi Techo for my daily log. And there's a space at the beginning of every month to write down, kind of, well, what do you want to get done this month? And I write down a list there. And at the top of that list and the top of my to-do list this year and the top of everything else, I've written the word finish.
Yeah. Just as a mantra.
Myself,
Yep. Yeah. I've got mine.
To remind myself, finish. And I finished so many things this year.
That's great. That's great.
So many things. I have no idea what my word for the year is going to be next. Maybe it'll be start.
Yeah.
So many things.
So one of the things that I think, I'm glad that you talk about things that revealed to you. So I will say that as we get close to wrapping up our conversation today, we've talked ad nauseum about the construction/repair work that happened in my house over the several months. And as of this recording, the work is done, and now we're dealing with payments and all that stuff. So the house is no longer under construction. We're now in the administrative part, which is great. But what I noticed, and this is probably going to go in my journal entry tonight, because as we were talking about this topic, it made me realize that if I didn't keep a journal, I think I would have lost my shit a lot more in front of them. I wouldn't have had a more reasoned approach to all of this. I think there's a therapeutic element to it that I think probably this year more than most in recent memory, it helped me with that.
Yeah, journaling is a great way to get all that bitching out of your system.
Yeah,
seriously, it's a good way to blow off some steam to a page and avoid blowing off that steam to a person.
Well, what it also did was, because I kept a journal every day, I have records anecdotally and empirically of when work was done on certain days. So that habit being ingrained, and now that we're running into some issues of, well, we didn't do this, or yes, we did. I'm like, actually, not only do I have email threads that support some of this stuff, but I know on this day this happened. And how do I know that? Because I keep a journal, right? So it served two purposes. I think keeping circuitous in some ways too. Keeping that journal kept me with the understanding that I'm going to know everything that happened and understand all of the stuff that happened in and around it, including how I felt about it. But it also served me to approach when I was dealing with any form of confrontation or discourse with anyone. I was able to keep more of a level head. So, and I think the level headedness was also, hey, I'm going to get a chance to, howl at the moon about this later in my journal if I want. But also, I have a bunch of evidence, some stuff to support what I'm believing. And it's not just a belief, it's valid. Well, what I'm saying is valid. So therefore, I'm not going to come up with some crazy, I'm not going to try to get in a shouting match to see who can shout louder. I don't need to. I have everything I need. So it served two purposes, which one is very, almost quantitative in a respect, in a way, and the other is very qualitative. And again, I think journaling, so to your point, and my criticism of Apple's journal and so on and so forth, I think to circle back to that, it takes care of some of the quantitative stuff to a degree, whereas, the qualitative stuff, that's what you bring to if you can get Apple and other journaling apps to kind of pull stuff in, that's going to take care of that. Number one, because it keeps, quote, the streak alive. Number two, it can give you fodder for your entries, right? Like if it's pulling a photo all that stuff. Of course.
Yeah. Like I said, breadcrumbs for the memory.
Yeah. So it's an aid. It's an aid, not just for those that want to get into journaling, but further to that, it's an aid for those that are in the journaling habit that sometimes come across a day where they're like, they want to write like
Oh
Hemingway.
gosh. Yeah. Or just like, holy cats, this day was so full of stuff. I don't even know where to begin.
Patrick, this has been not only a great conversation today for this episode, but we've had a great season of PM Talks. And we're coming back next year, 2025, for season 2. We've already kind of got our topics planned out. But if you want to help us choose topics, you can leave comments in Spotify. I look at those. You could even drop an email to podcast@mikevardy.com and say, hey, would you and Patrick will be willing to talk about this stuff? Let's put it this way. There's no shortage of things that we can talk about. So, but Patrick, where can people keep up with you and what you're doing online? And, I know you've got the book out there as well. So share that before we wrap up.
Yep. So patrickrhone.net is my blog, is where I can be found on the most regular basis. I don't put a lot out on social media. I use it very sparingly. I have reasons behind that. And those reasons actually are on my blog under the page site notes, which I think every blog should have, about like, what are some things I should know about this site while I'm reading it, while I'm going into it. So yeah, just if you look at the navigation on the top and you choose site notes, that'll usually explain to you why I don't post much to social media, but post almost everything there. In any case, I digress. And of course, patrickrhone.com is my commercial side, and is where you can find links to my books and all the other places that I might be found online. And yeah, I think that's probably the best places.
Patrick, this has been great. Thanks so much for taking the time to have a productive conversation with me again. And another series of PM Talks is coming, starting next month. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Who knows what the future holds?